There was work started on Kraid, and when it became clear there was no way that Kraid was going to be finished in a way that would be acceptable or good, then basically the Kraid room became the Omega Pirate room. But Kraid had some work done on it. It was going to be, a similar Kraidish design of him shooting platforms out his tummy or whatever. It never got to a meaningful place in development. We basically got almost nothing done on it when it was determined that there was just no way it was going to make it across the finish line. Our thought was if you did the speed booster, then you'd have to sort of go into third and then go back in, kind of like what we do in Screw Attack in Primes 2 and 3. We already had enough of a hard time dealing with load issues, and I think it was sort of determined that the boost ball was fast, but I think people would have expected the speed booster to be more sustained and faster. With the boost ball, you kind of do a boost and then stop, and a boost and stop, and that kind of made sense. But then with a speed booster, you kind of want it to be that way. But everything about what we were doing in Prime and Prime 2 was actually trying to slow the players down. We just never had a straightaway that would have been long enough to make the speed booster relevant or useful.
And there was a leftover early idea from Metroid Prime 1 that we didn't do. I wanted to do a canyon fight where you were standing on the top surface of your ship while it was maneuvering down a canyon, and you were fighting Ridley while he was flying around you in front of and behind. I wanted to do, sort of a horizontal version of that, where because I wanted to have the ship do something cool.
Yeah.
Right. And I was imagining kind of a Star Wars trench run with a giant, alien dinosaur monster, with Samus on top of her ship running back and forth, and being able to have the ship raise shields and bounce Ridley shots off and do all this sort of stuff, and being able to shoot down stretches of arches of rock overhead and have it fall on Ridley, and they're like, Mike, no, cool visual idea, we shouldn't do that.
I ported a SNES emulator to the GameCube and had it actually running just for fun, and then the talked, hey, could we make this a thing? And they were like, I don't know, we could ask. And so we asked, and then Nintendo was like, well, that's third-party code and a bunch of other stuff, so they kind of kiboshed that. But it started the idea churning, and they did have the NES emulations library that they had built for the GameCube, and so that turned into bringing the original Metroid into the game with the Game Link with Fusion. So while Super Metroid itself wasn't embedded in the game, that kind of created the idea and ended up with putting the original Metroid in the game. Infinite bomb jumping would break a lot of puzzle design. So the collision geometry was almost usually just the blue room geometry itself, which could be converted into collision geometry, and then the artist would paint. And so a lot of times there was no geometry. It was built in 3D Studio Max and Maya. So there's no geometry in the ceiling. There's just no triangles up there. So that's why you can fly out. We could put a ceiling in, but again, it's one of those things that kind of breaks immersion. If some reason you could launch yourself up, if you bomb that high and you just hit an artificial ceiling, that's kind of weird.
Originally, we had contacted the band Autechre to do the soundtrack, and we even used some of their stuff as for one of our demo levels. It would have been amazing, but Nintendo kind of pushed back on that idea. Kenji Yamamoto came on board, and we were all excited about that, and he actually gave us a very early prototype track he did that was meant for the title screen, and it's never been released as far as I know. But it was very different than what we ended up with the final Prime soundtrack. It was very guitar heavy, like a space rock kind of thing, as if.
Oh, really?
As if Steve Vai met Sun Ra, kind of like this weird, psychedelic almost, spacey sounding rock thing with guitars and solos and noodling, and it was very different from what any of us had expected, because we were really thinking more in terms of that original Autechre sound, which is more experimental and more like a darker, more ominous kind of sound.